The darkest places in the world don't always have an address. Sometimes they are just a URL that works only at night, through a network that doesn't exist. And sometimes all it takes is one man for that place to begin devouring real lives. When Ross Ulbricht sat down at his laptop, he didn't look like someone about to change the history of crime. No mask, no weapon, .com, almost boring. Well-educated, obsessed with the idea of freedom. Convinced that governments were the problem, not the lack of rules. He believed that if you removed the state and the law, people would naturally find balance. That belief was the first step toward something he himself didn't fully understand. In 2011, he launched a website accessible only through Tor. He called it Silk Road. The name sounded romantic, almost historical. A place of exchange, a free market, anonymity, Bitcoin as currency. No names, no faces, no accountability. At first, the goods were mostly drugs, soft ones, as he liked to tell himself, marijuana, mushrooms, LSD. Ross reassured himself that he wasn't forcing anyone. People would buy these things anyway. He was just facilitating. But the internet doesn't tolerate a vacuum. Where there is demand, supply follows. Over time, the listings grew darker. Heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, then fentanyl, then weapons. Every click became a transaction. Every transaction a potential death sentence, signed by a stranger behind a screen. Stories began appearing on Silk Road's forums. Not statistics. Stories. Someone wrote that a brother fell asleep and never woke up. Someone else said their girlfriend received a batch that felt different and ended up in the hospital. There were posts from mothers who didn't even know what Tor was, but knew a package had arrived in the mainland. Afterward, their son was gone forever. Ross read all of it. Logged in as the administrator. Responded coldly. Rules, disclaimers. No responsibility. He wasn't selling anything. It was just a marketplace. Lines move slowly. First you justify one thing, then another. Eventually, you forget where the first line ever was. As Silk Road grew into an empire, a new threat emerged. Danger from within. Scammers, people trying to steal from escrow. Enemies threatening to expose the administrator's identity. Ross lived in constant tension. He slept with his laptop next to his bed. Changed usernames. Changed operational patterns. Every message could be a trap. Every new user a federal agent, and then he took a step. There was no returning from private messages. Later seized by investigators, there were discussions about solving problems. Specific sums of money, clear instructions, conversations conducted without emotion, as if discussing logistics, not human lives. Contract killings meant to protect the market. It doesn't matter whether every one of them was carried out. What matters is that Ross was willing to pay for someone to die in order to preserve his vision of freedom. At that moment, Silk Road stopped being an experiment. It became an organized criminal enterprise. And Ross became someone who didn't just enable evil, but was willing to order it. The paranoia intensified. The FBI was closing in. Agents infiltrated the forums, posed as vendors, built trust, waited. They didn't want to shut the site down. They wanted the man behind it. They knew that if they closed the market, another would appear. If they caught the creator, they would make an example. On October 1, 2013, Ross entered a public library in San Francisco. The irony was thick. A place of knowledge, silence, order. He opened his laptop, logged in as Dread Pirate Roberts. In that second, he stopped being anonymous. Agents were right beside him. They acted fast to prevent him from closing the computer. 1 click more, 1 second more, and the drive would have been encrypted. He didn't get the chance. On the laptop, was his entire world. Logs, messages, Bitcoin wallets worth millions, records of conversations about murder for hire, evidence that required no interpretation. Silk Road vanished in an instant, as if someone had flipped a switch. The trial was long and merciless. The prosecution didn't talk about ideology. They talked about victims, about people who died from drugs bought with a single click, about families who never learned who truly sold death to their loved ones, about decisions Ross made consciously, night after night. The verdict came in 2015. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Ross Ulbricht was 31 years old. He left the courtroom as a man who would never be free again. No internet, no market, no ideology to hide behind. Silk Road was only the beginning. Other markets followed. More brutal, more cynical. But it was Ross Ulbricht who opened the door. He proved that you could build a state without law in the dark corners of the internet, that such a state always ends in blood. Today, he sits in a cell with time to think about freedom, about boundaries, about how many lives were lost because of an experiment that spiraled out of control. And the dark net still exists, silent, patient, waiting for the next person who believes they are smarter than the system. Have you ever wondered what it takes to build a digital empire? What about an empire built entirely in the shadows, on the dark web? Today, we're diving into the shocking true story of a man who did just that. A seemingly ordinary computer programmer from Quebec, Canada, who became one of the most wanted cybercriminals in the world. This is the story of Alexandre Casas, the mastermind behind Alphabay. Our story begins not in a high-tech lab, but in the quiet city of Trois-Rivières, Quebec. Alexandre Casas was born in 1991, and from a young age, he was fascinated by computers. Friends and family described him as a bit of a geek, but a brilliant one. He was quiet, introverted, and spent most of his time glued to a computer screen. He wasn't just playing games, he was learning, dissecting code, and understanding the digital world on a level most of us can't even imagine. By his teenage years, he had already started a small business, a company that sold computers and repaired them. He was a legitimate entrepreneur, a young man with a promising future in tech. But, behind the scenes, a different ambition was taking root. Casas was drawn to the darker corners of the internet. He became active on forums and communities dedicated to hacking and cybercrime. Under the alias Alpha-02, he started to build a reputation. He wasn't just a participant. He was a leader, a visionary. He saw the potential for something massive, something that could dwarf all other darknet markets. The most famous one at the time was Silk Road. But Casas believed he could do better. He wanted to create a platform that was more secure, more user-friendly, and offered a wider variety of goods. In late 2014, his vision became a reality. Alphabay Market was launched. Initially, it was just another small player in the crowded darknet space. But Casas had designed it meticulously. The site's interface was clean, its security features were robust, and its customer service was surprisingly responsive for a criminal enterprise. It wasn't long before vendors and buyers started flocking to it. The downfall of other markets, like the original Silk Road, created a power vacuum, and Alphabay was perfectly positioned to fill it. What made Alphabay so successful? Casas ran it like a legitimate tech giant. He implemented a rating and review system, an internal messaging service, and even an escrow system to protect transactions. It was the Amazon of the dark web. You could find almost anything imaginable for sale. Stolen credit card numbers, malware, firearms, and a huge variety of illegal substances. The site grew at an explosive rate. Within just 2 years, it had over 200,000 users and 40,000 vendors. It was processing hundreds of thousands of dollars in transactions every single day, all in untraceable cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Monero. And what about Alexander Kazas, the man behind the curtain? He was living a life you only see in movies. Using the immense profits from Alphabay, he crafted a new identity for himself. He moved to Thailand, a country known for its luxurious lifestyle and relaxed approach to certain things. He presented himself as a wealthy web developer and investor. He bought a Lamborghini Aventador, a Porsche Panamera, and multiple properties, including a $6 million villa in Bangkok. He married a Thai woman and lived a life of extravagant parties and international travel. On social media, he was anything but quiet. He posted photos of his flashy cars, his luxury homes, and his jet-setting lifestyle. To the outside world, he was just another young tech millionaire living the dream. No one suspected that this fortune was built on a massive, global criminal operation. He was hiding in plain sight, using his legitimate business ventures as a cover to launder the millions of dollars pouring in from Alphabay. He was meticulous about his operational security, using encryption and anonymizing tools to hide his tracks. He believed he was untouchable. But while Kazas was enjoying his life of luxury, law enforcement agencies around the world were closing in. The FBI, the DI, and the Dutch National Police had formed a joint task force. They knew Alphabay was the biggest fish in the pond, and taking it down became their top priority. The investigation was codenamed Operation Bayonet, and it was a masterpiece of international police cooperation. The big break came from a simple, almost unbelievable mistake. When a new user registered on Alphabay, they received a welcome email. Investigators managed to trace the header of one of these emails back to a personal Hotmail address: pimp_alex_91@hotmail.com. It was an old email address Alexander Kazas had used years ago. It seems that in a moment of carelessness, he had left this digital breadcrumb. This single clue connected the shadowy figure of Alpha 02 to the real-world identity of Alexander Kazas. The investigators began to piece everything together. They tracked his lavish spending, his company registrations, and his online activity. They followed the money, linking his crypto wallets to the vast sums being processed by Alphabay. They had their man. The plan was not just to arrest Kazas, but to dismantle his entire empire in a way that would send a shockwave through the darknet community. In July 2017, the endgame began. Thai police, acting on a request from the US, raided Kazas's villa in Bangkok. They caught him completely by surprise. At the moment of his arrest, he was logged into the Alphabay server on his laptop, actively working as the site's administrator. The laptop was open, unencrypted. It was the digital smoking gun they needed, containing all the evidence to link him directly to the operation of the entire market. They had access to passwords, server locations, and financial records. Simultaneously, law enforcement in the Netherlands secretly seized control of another major darknet market called Hansa. This was a brilliant move. While they publicly announced the takedown of Alphabay, they kept the Hansa seizure quiet. Panicked Alphabay users, looking for a new place to conduct their business, flooded onto the Hansa market. What they didn't know was that every single message, every transaction, was now being monitored by the police. For a month, investigators gathered intelligence on thousands of dealers and buyers. Back in Thailand, Alexander Kazas was being held in a Bangkok jail, awaiting extradition to the United States. He faced charges that would have likely put him in prison for the rest of his life. But just a week after his arrest, the story took another tragic turn. On July 12, 2017, Kazas was found dead in his cell. The official cause of death was suicide. At just 25 years old, the king of the dark web was gone. The fallout was immense. Law enforcement announced the complete takedown of both Alphabet and Hansa. They had not only arrested the mastermind, but had also gathered a treasure trove of data on countless other criminals. The story of Alexander Cassis serves as a powerful cautionary tale. It shows how a brilliant mind can be turned towards a destructive path, and how the anonymity of the internet is often just an illusion. He built an empire in the digital darkness, but, in the end, a single mistake brought it all crashing down. The chase for cybercriminals continues, but the takedown of Alphabet remains one of the most significant victories for law enforcement in the digital age. It proved that no one is truly untouchable, not even the kings of the dark web. Some stories don't begin with a scream. They begin with silence. With locked doors, covered windows, and a camera positioned so that nothing can be seen from the outside. When the name Peter Gerard Scully first began appearing in investigative reports, no one yet understood what they were truly dealing with. On the dark net, there were whispers about a video that couldn't be described. Material so extreme that even hardened criminals claimed they turned it off after minutes. Many dismissed it as another internet myth. The web was full of stories meant only to shock. This time, the myth was real. Scully was born in Australia. For years, he lived what looked like an ordinary life. A family, children, work, nothing that marked him as a monster. But when serious financial fraud charges began closing in on him, he disappeared. In 2011, he fled to the Philippines, two regions where poverty was widespread and children were often left unprotected. There, he realized that internet anonymity and human desperation could combine into perfect conditions for crime. Scully did not snatch children off the street in broad daylight. There was no chaos. There was a system. Parents were told their children would receive food, shelter, education, sometimes a small payment. For many families, this felt like the only chance for survival. That was how children were handed over into homes they could not leave on their own. Once the doors closed, isolation began. Phones were taken, contact with the outside world was cut off. Children were kept inside for days, sometimes longer. The violence was not sudden. It was gradual. First came fear and confusion, then physical pain, then total submission. Investigators later concluded that Scully acted methodically. His goal was to break the victims psychologically, to strip them of any will to resist. What he did was recorded. Cameras were set up in advance. Scenes were prepared. Every element was controlled. There was no impulse, no chaos, only cold calculation. The children were treated as material, and the recordings as products intended for a specific group of buyers. The darknet provided anonymity, and cryptocurrency ensured the money flowed without clear traces. The abuse was repeated. The children were forced into obedience, punished for any resistance, deprived of sleep and any sense of safety. Food and silence were tools of control. Screaming was routine. The goal was not merely to capture footage, but to achieve complete domination. Investigators later stated that the evidence showed a deliberate pursuit of psychological control and humiliation, not a single act of violence. One of the girls seen in the recordings did not survive. After days of abuse, she was killed. That was the moment the case stopped being online. There was a body, a crime scene, a perpetrator who had not only documented violence, but escalated it to murder and preserved it as evidence. For a long time, Scully felt untouchable. He changed locations, relied on accomplices. He believed his clients would never come forward because they were just as guilty as he was. For a while, he was right. The material circulated in closed circles until fragments reached people who knew exactly where to report them. An international investigation began slowly, relentlessly. Transactions were analyzed, servers traced, technical mistakes examined. Every trail led to the Philippines, to the city of Malaybalay. There, on February 20th, 2015, police finally knocked on the door. Scully was arrested without resistance, as if he knew it was only a matter of time. As the investigation unfolded, the full scale of his crimes became clear. Dozens of charges, hundreds of pieces of evidence, survivors who lived but would never return to normal life. And one child who could not be saved. The trials dragged on for years. Each crime was counted separately. Each victim was named in the indictments. In 2018, Scully was sentenced to life imprisonment. In 2022, another sentence followed an additional 129 years. Not because he would ever live that long, but to make clear that every act had been individually recognized and judged. Today, Peter Scully sits in a prison cell. No internet, no audience, no customers. His name is no longer just a name. It is a symbol, one of the darkest chapters in the history of the darknet. A reminder that technology does not create monsters, but it can give them the perfect place to operate. And somewhere, in investigative archives, there are pieces of evidence that will never be shown. Not because they are classified, but because sometimes the only humane decision is to let certain images disappear forever. Have you ever heard of the Silk Road? Not the ancient trade route, but the infamous online black market. Well, after the FBI shut it down and arrested its creator, Ross Ulbricht, a new kingpin emerged. Someone who thought they could learn from Ulbricht's mistakes and build an even bigger, more untouchable empire. This is the story of Blake Benthel, the programmer who became the new Dread Pirate Roberts. Our story starts in late 2013. The original Silk Road is gone, and the dark web is in chaos. But nature and the internet abhors a vacuum. Just 5 weeks after the first Silk Road was dismantled, a new site appeared. Silk Road 2.0. It looked almost identical to its predecessor, and it promised the same thing, a place to buy and sell anything, anonymously. The person behind it all called themselves Dread Pirate Roberts, too, a direct nod to the founder of the original site. The dark web community was buzzing. Was this a trap set by law enforcement, or was this a genuine successor, a phoenix rising from the ashes? For a while, it seemed like the latter. Silk Road 2.0 quickly became the go-to marketplace for illicit goods. It was generating millions of dollars in sales every month, and Dread Pirate Roberts 2 seemed to be one step ahead of everyone. They were smart, they were cautious, and they were making a fortune. The FBI was watching, of course, but the new kingpin was a ghost. They operated behind layers of encryption and anonymity, a digital phantom in the vast expanse of the dark web. The man behind the mask was Blake Benthel. On the surface, he was just another tech guy living in San Francisco. He was 26 years old, a former SpaceX rocket scientist, a software engineer who worked for startups, and someone who loved coding and the Bitcoin community. He drove a Tesla, lived in a nice apartment near the famous Mission Dolores Park, and seemed like the very picture of a successful young professional living the Silicon Valley dream. No one, not his friends, not his family, could have guessed his secret life. While his colleagues saw him as a talented but perhaps slightly eccentric programmer, Blake was secretly managing a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise from his laptop. Under the alias DEFCON, he meticulously built and maintained Silk Road 2.0. He handled server administration, managed the forum, dealt with customer service issues, and oversaw a small team of online administrators. He was the puppet master, pulling all the strings, all while maintaining his everyday life. It was a classic Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation, a digital age double life. So how did a brilliant programmer from Texas end up as one of the most wanted men on the internet? Blake's journey wasn't an overnight transformation. He was always fascinated by the fringes of the internet and the ideology of digital freedom. He was an early adopter of Bitcoin and a follower of the libertarian ideals that were popular in the early crypto community. He saw the original Silk Road not just as a black market, but as a bold experiment in free market principles, a place beyond government control. When Ross Ulbricht was arrested, Benthel didn't see it as a warning. He saw it as a challenge. He believed he could do it better, that he could fix the security flaws that led to Ulbricht's downfall. He saw an opportunity, a massive power vacuum waiting to be filled. So, using his considerable coding skills, he launched Silk Road 2.0. In his mind, he wasn't just a criminal. He was a revolutionary, a digital pirate captain navigating the uncharted waters of the dark web. But running a massive online black market is not a one-man job, and it's incredibly stressful. The site was under constant threat from hackers, scammers, and of course, law enforcement agencies from around the world. In December 2013, just a month after launch, the site was hacked, and nearly $2.7 million worth of Bitcoin was stolen from its escrow accounts. This was a huge blow. Dread Pirate Roberts too had to go into damage control, promising to repay the users. Blake Benthel, the man behind the curtain, was likely in a full-blown panic. This was the dark side of being a kingpin. When things go wrong, everyone looks to you. Despite the setbacks, Silk Road 2.0 continued to grow. By October 2014, it was boasting over 150,000 active users and generating an estimated $8 million in sales per month. Benthel himself was earning a commission on every single transaction, pulling in hundreds of thousands of dollars. He used the money to fund his lifestyle, including that now infamous $127,000 Tesla Model S. He was living large, but the net was closing in. Unbeknownst to Blake, the FBI hadn't given up. In fact, they had an ace up their sleeve. One of the key administrators on Silk Road 2.0, a person Benthel trusted, was actually an undercover federal agent. This agent had been inside the operation from the very beginning, gaining Benthel's trust and gathering crucial evidence. They had access to private messages, administrative panels, and behind-the-scenes conversations. Benthel's ghost-like anonymity was slowly being stripped away. The breakthrough for the FBI came from a simple, almost careless mistake. They traced the physical server hosting Silk Road 2.0 to a location outside the United States. While the server itself was encrypted, the hosting provider's records were not, and those records led them to a personal Gmail address. That email address belonged to none other than Blake Benthel. From there, the digital breadcrumbs were easy to follow. They connected his online alias Defcon to his real-world identity through his online activities, his coding projects on sites like GitHub, and his Bitcoin transactions. The digital phantom now had a name and a face. On November 5, 2014, Blake Benthel's two worlds collided spectacularly. As he left his apartment in San Francisco, federal agents were waiting. They pulled up in unmarked cars, and just like that, the reign of Dread Pirate Roberts II was over. The arrest was quiet and swift. They seized his laptop, his Tesla, and thousands of dollars in cash. When they logged into his computer, it was still open to the Silk Road 2.0 administrator panel, the digital smoking gun. He reportedly admitted his identity as Defcon, and the creator of the site, almost immediately. The game was up. The fall of Silk Road 2.0 sent shockwaves through the dark web. The site was seized and replaced with an FBI notice, just like its predecessor. For the second time in just over a year, the biggest name in online black markets had been taken down. The story of Blake Benthel served as another stark reminder. No matter how smart you are, no matter how many layers of anonymity you use, running a criminal enterprise of that scale leaves a trail. Unlike Ross Ulbricht, who fought the charges and was sentenced to life in prison, Blake Benthel took a different path. He cooperated fully with the authorities. He pleaded guilty to charges including conspiracy to commit drug trafficking and computer hacking. Because of his cooperation, he received a much lighter sentence. After serving his time, he was released and has since tried to rebuild his life. Staying out of the public eye, the story of Blake Benthel is a fascinating cautionary tale about talent, ambition, and ideology. It shows how a brilliant mind can be led down a dangerous path, and how the allure of power and wealth can be intoxicating. He had all the skills to be a leader in the legitimate tech world, yet he chose to become a kingpin in the digital underworld. It's a story about the double-edged sword of the internet, a tool that can be used to build incredible things, but also to create vast criminal empires. And it proves, once again, that even the most formidable digital pirates can't hide from the real world forever. Ever wonder how a few college kids almost broke the internet? This isn't a movie plot. It's the true story of Mirai, a name that once sent shivers down the spine of the entire tech world. And it all started, believe it or not, over a video game, Minecraft. Our story begins with three young men, Perez Jha, Josiah White, and Dalton Norman. They weren't criminal masterminds in a high-tech lair. They were just college students who were really into Minecraft. So into it, in fact, that they ran their own popular Minecraft servers. Hosting these servers was a lucrative business, and competition was fierce. They wanted an edge, a way to knock their rivals' servers offline and drive players to their own. Their solution? A digital weapon of unprecedented scale. They started by scanning the internet, not for computers or phones, but for the millions of overlooked, insecure devices that make up the Internet of Things, or IoT. Think about your smart camera, your digital video recorder, maybe even your smart toaster. These devices are connected to the internet. But most people never change the default factory set usernames and passwords. They're just sitting there, wide open. The trio created a piece of malware, a program they named Mirai, which means future in Japanese. Mirai was brilliantly simple. It relentlessly scanned the internet for IoT devices, trying to log in using a list of about 60 common default username and password combinations, like admin and password. When it found a match, it would infect the device, turning it into a zombie, a soldier in a rapidly growing digital army. Unlike other malware, Mirai wasn't designed to steal your data or hold your files for ransom. Its only purpose was to obey a single command, to flood a target with so much internet traffic that it would collapse under the strain. Each individual infected device sent a tiny, insignificant amount of traffic. But when hundreds of thousands of them acted in unison, the result was a tidal wave of data capable of knocking almost any website offline. At first, they used their new weapon for its original purpose, Minecraft server wars. They'd target a competitor, their server would crash, and frustrated players would flock to Jha's server. It was a dirty trick, but it worked. Their business boomed. Feeling bold, Jha, using the online alias Honor-senpai, even released the source code for Mirai onto a hacking forum. He thought it would cover their tracks, making it harder to trace the attacks back to them. Instead, he unleashed chaos. Now, anyone could build their own Mirai botnet, and they did. The code spread like wildfire, and soon, copycat botnets were popping up everywhere. Used for everything from online extortion to digital vandalism, the internet was suddenly a much more dangerous place. The real trouble started in September 2016. The botnet was used to launch a massive attack against the website of Brian Krebs, a renowned security journalist who had been investigating DDoS for hire services. The attack on Krebs's site was record-breaking at the time, a staggering 620 gigabits per second of traffic. It was so powerful that Akamai, the company providing his security, had to drop him as a client because protecting him was costing them too much money. The message was clear. Mirai was a force to be reckoned with. But that was just a warm-up. A few weeks later, the Mirai botnet set its sights on a new, much bigger target, a company called DIN. You might not have heard of DIN, but you've definitely used its services. DIN is a major DNS provider. Think of DNS as the internet's phone book. When you type a website like youtube.com into your browser, DNS is what translates that name into the numerical IP address that computers use to find the site. On the morning of October 21, 2016, the Mirai botnet attacked DIN. The flood of traffic from hundreds of thousands of infected webcams, printers, and other IoT devices overwhelmed DIN's servers. The internet's phone book went down. And when it did, a huge portion of the internet went with it. Suddenly, major sites across the United States and Europe were unreachable. Twitter, Netflix, Spotify, Reddit, PayPal, the New York Times, Airbnb, they all vanished from the web for hours. People woke up and couldn't check their social media, they couldn't stream music or watch their favorite shows. For a significant part of the world, it felt like the internet was broken. Panic and confusion spread. Was this a foreign cyber attack? An act of digital war? Nobody knew. All they knew was that their digital lives had come to a grinding halt. This was the moment Mirai went from a gamer's tool to a global threat. It exposed a fundamental weakness at the heart of our increasingly connected world. All those convenient smart devices we fill our homes with. They were a Trojan horse, an army in waiting, and their password was literally password. The FBI, along with security agencies around the world, launched a massive investigation. The pressure was on to find who was behind Mirai. The trail eventually led back to our three Minecraft entrepreneurs. Brian Krebs, the journalist they had attacked, played a key role. Despite being forced offline, he continued his investigation, connecting the dots between the online persona Honor Senpai and Perez Jar. Faced with mounting evidence and the threat of decades in prison, the trio's partnership crumbled. Josiah White, worried about the FBI's investigation into the DIN attack, reached out to the authorities first. He confessed his role and agreed to cooperate against his partners. Soon after, Jar and Norman were also apprehended. In the end, they weren't treated as master criminals. They were treated as what they were: talented but reckless young men who made a series of terrible decisions. They pleaded guilty. Because of their cooperation with the FBI, where they even helped to stop other cyber attacks, they avoided long prison sentences. They were sentenced to 5 years of probation, 2,500 hours of community service, much of it working for the FBI, and had to pay back the money they made. The story of Mirai is a powerful cautionary tale. It shows how a simple idea, fueled by petty rivalry, can spiral into a global crisis. It was a wake-up call for the entire tech industry about the dangers of insecure IoT devices. Manufacturers started paying more attention to security, and consumers became more aware of the need to change those default passwords. but the ghost of Mirai still lingers. The source code is still out there, and new variants of the botnet continue to pop up. Our world is only getting more connected, with billions more smart devices coming online every year. Mirai taught us that the security of the internet is only as strong as its weakest link, whether that's a massive server or a simple, forgotten security camera in someone's home. It's a reminder that in our digital world, small vulnerabilities can lead to catastrophic failures. So next time you set up a new smart device, take a moment to change the password. You might just be preventing the next Thanks for watching, and if you found this story fascinating, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden world of technology. See you next time.